Once, in a time long ago, there was a valley, so vast, so empty, that it seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. But this valley was not empty of life. No, it was full of bones, dry bones, bones that had once belonged to a great people, now scattered and forgotten, abandoned by time and by fate. These were the bones of Israel, a shadow of what they once were. It was in this valley of death that a man named Ezekiel found himself. He was brought here not by his own will, but by the hand of the Lord. And as he stood in the midst of those bones, he could feel the weight of their silence. There were no birds singing, no life stirring, just the wind, the dry earth, and the bones waiting for something to happen. And as the stillness of the valley seemed to deepen, a voice, no, not a voice, but the very presence of God, spoke into that silence. "Son of man, can these bones live?" It wasn't a question of doubt but of possibility, a question that hung in the air like a challenge. Could these bones, this people who had long been forgotten, ever come to life again? Ezekiel didn't know how to answer. The valley was too silent, too full of death, yet in his heart, he knew one thing for certain: he did not have the answer, only God knew. And then, the voice spoke again. This time it was a command, not a question, but a declaration. "Prophesy to these bones," the voice said. "Tell them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord." Ezekiel, though shaken, knew what he had to do. And so, standing in the midst of the valley, he spoke. He called out to the bones, proclaiming the word of God to them. And as Ezekiel spoke, something began to happen. The bones that lay scattered, broken, began to move. At first, it was only a rattle, but soon the pieces began to fit together. The bones of the legs, the arms, the ribs, each one finding its place, joining with the others, until skeletons stood where there had been none. One by one, the skeletons stood, not as piles of bones but as figures, tall and still. And for a moment the valley was filled with a strange, eerie silence. God's voice rang out once more powerful than before. "Prophesy to the breath," God commanded. "Say to the breath, come from the four winds, and breathe into these bodies, that they may live." And Ezekiel, obeying the command, spoke again. He called to the winds, to the breath of life. The wind howled through the valley, sweeping through the lifeless bodies. And then, it happened. The breath entered them, slowly at first, a faint stirring. Then, with sudden force, the bodies began to jerk and move. Their chests rose and fell. Their eyes opened wide. They were alive. The breath of life filled them, and they stood. Not just as skeletons, but as a mighty army, alive with power and purpose. And there, in the valley where death had reigned, stood a mighty army. The bones had come together. The breath had entered them. What was once dead was now alive. What was once scattered and broken had been restored. The valley that was a graveyard had become a place of life, of hope. And God spoke again, making clear the meaning of what had happened. "These bones," he said, "represent the people of Israel. They say, 'Our bones are dried up, our hope is gone, and we are cut off. But I will open your graves and bring you back to the land of Israel. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live." God had promised to restore his people, to bring them back to life. And through this vision, he showed that no matter how hopeless a situation may seem, no matter how broken, how dry, the breath of God can bring life and bring hope to the most desolate of places.